Chapter X, The Ultimate Verdict, Civilizational Damage Beyond Historical Precedent. The forensic analysis of modern scientific gatekeeping reveals a crime against human civilization that exceeds in scope and consequence any documented atrocity in recorded history. This conclusion is not rhetorical, but mathematical, and based on measurable analysis of temporal scope, geographical reach, opportunity cost calculation, and compound civilizational impact. The systematic suppression of scientific innovation by confidence artists like Tyson, Cox, and Kaku has created civilizational damage that will persist across indefinite time horizons, foreclosing technological and intellectual possibilities that can never be recovered. The temporal scope of epistemic crime extends beyond the biological limitations that constrain all forms of political tyranny. Where the most devastating historical atrocities were limited by the lifespans of their perpetrators and the sustainability of coercive systems, these false paradigms embedded in scientific institutions become permanent features of civilizational knowledge that persist across multiple generations without natural termination mechanisms. The Galileo suppression demonstrates this temporal persistence in historical operation. The institutional enforcement of geocentric astronomy delayed accurate navigation, chronometry, and celestial mechanics for over a century after empirical evidence had definitively established heliocentric models. The civilizational cost included thousands of deaths from navigational errors, delayed global exploration, communication, and the retardation of mathematical and physical sciences that depended on accurate astronomical foundations. Most significantly, the Galileo suppression established cultural precedents for institutional authority over empirical evidence that became embedded in educational systems, religious doctrine, and political governance across European civilization. These precedents influenced social attitudes toward truth, authority, and individual reasoning for centuries after the specific astronomical controversy had been resolved. The civilizational trajectory was permanently altered in ways that foreclosed alternative developmental paths that might have emerged from earlier acceptance of observational methodology and empirical reasoning. The modern implementation of epistemic suppression operates through mechanisms that are qualitatively more sophisticated and geographically more extensive than their historical predecessors, creating compound civilizational damage that exceeds the Galileo precedent by orders of magnitude. The global reach of contemporary institutions ensures that suppression operates simultaneously across all continents and cultures, preventing alternative paradigms from emerging anywhere in the international scientific community. The technological opportunity costs are correspondingly greater because contemporary suppression prevents not just individual discoveries, but entire technological civilizations that could have emerged from alternative scientific frameworks. The systematic exclusion of plasma cosmology, electric universe theories, and alternative models of gravitation has foreclosed research directions that might have yielded revolutionary advances in energy generation, space propulsion, materials science, and environmental restoration. These opportunity costs compound exponentially rather than linearly, because each foreclosed discovery prevents not only immediate technological applications, but entire cascades of subsequent innovation that could have emerged from breakthrough technologies. The suppression of alternative energy research, for example, prevents not only new energy systems, but all the secondary innovations in manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, and social organization that would have emerged from abundant clean energy sources. The psychological conditioning effects of modern scientific gatekeeping create civilizational damage that is qualitatively different from, and ultimately more destructive than the immediate suffering inflicted by political tyranny. Where political oppression creates awareness of injustice that eventually generates resistance, reform, and the epistemic oppression that destroys the cognitive capacity for recognizing intellectual imprisonment, creating populations that believe they are educated while being systematically rendered incapable of independent reasoning. This represents the ultimate form of civilizational damage, the destruction not just of knowledge, but of the capacity to know. Populations subjected to systematic scientific gatekeeping lose the ability to distinguish between established knowledge and institutional consensus, between empirical evidence and theoretical speculation, between scientific methodology and credentialism authority. The result is civilizational cognitive degradation that becomes self-perpetuating across indefinite time horizons. The comparative analysis with political tyranny reveals the superior magnitude and persistence of epistemic crime through multiple measurable dimensions. Where political tyranny inflicts suffering that generates awareness and eventual resistance, epistemic tyranny creates ignorance that generates gratitude and voluntary submission. Where political oppression is limited by geographical boundaries and resource constraints, epistemic oppression operates globally through voluntary intellectual submission that requires no external enforcement. The Adolf Hitler comparison is employed not for rhetorical effect, but for rigorous analytical purpose, and demonstrates these qualitative differences in operation. The Nazi regime, operating from 1933 to 1945, directly caused approximately 17 million civilian deaths through systematic murder, forced labor, and medical experimentation. The geographical scope extended across occupied Europe and affected populations in dozens of countries. The economic destruction included the elimination of cultural institutions, appropriation of scientific resources, and redirection of national capabilities toward conquest and genocide. The temporal boundaries of Nazi destruction were absolute and clearly defined. Hitler's death and the regime's collapse terminated the systematic implementation of genocidal policies, enabling immediate reconstruction with international support, legal accountability through war crimes tribunals, and educational programs ensuring historical memory and prevention of recurrence. The measurable consequences, while catastrophic in immediate scope, were ultimately finite and recoverable through democratic restoration and international cooperation. The documentation of Nazi crimes created permanent institutional memory that serves as protection against repetition, legal frameworks for prosecuting similar atrocities, and educational curricula, ensuring that each generation understands the warning signs and consequences of political tyranny. The exposure of the crimes generated social and political innovations that improved civilizational capacity for addressing future challenges. In contrast, the scientific gatekeeping implemented by contemporary confidence artists operates through mechanisms that are structurally immune to the temporal limitations, geographical boundaries, and corrective mechanisms that eventually terminated political tyranny. The institutional suppression of scientific innovation creates compound civilizational damage that expands across indefinite time horizons without natural termination points or self-correcting mechanisms. The civilizational trajectory alteration caused by epistemic crime is permanent and irreversible in ways that political destruction cannot match. Nazi destruction, while devastating in immediate scope, created opportunities for reconstruction that often exceeded pre-war capabilities. Post-war Europe developed more advanced democratic institutions, more sophisticated international cooperation, and more robust economic systems than had existed before the Nazi period. Scientific gatekeeping creates the opposite dynamic, systematic foreclosure of possibilities that can never be recovered. Each generation trained in false theoretical frameworks loses access to entire domains of potential discovery that become permanently inaccessible. The research resources directed toward failed paradigms cannot be redirected toward productive alternatives once institutional momentum is established. The technological civilizations that could have emerged from suppressed alternatives become permanently foreclosed developmental paths. The mathematical calculation of civilizational damage must therefore account for infinite temporal horizons, global geographical scope, and exponentially compounding opportunity costs that political tyranny cannot match. The immediate suffering inflicted by political oppression, while greater in intensity, is finite in duration and ultimately recoverable through social reconstruction. The civilizational degradation caused by epistemic oppression is infinite in duration, global in scope, and irreversible in consequence. The ultimate verdict is therefore unambiguous and mathematically demonstrable. The systematic suppression of scientific innovation by institutional confidence artists represents the greatest crime against human civilization in recorded history. The temporal persistence, geographical reach, and compound opportunity costs of epistemic crime exceed those of any documented political atrocity by orders of magnitude, creating civilizational damage that will persist across indefinite time horizons, foreclosing technological and intellectual possibilities that can never be recovered. This conclusion requires no qualification, hedging, or rhetorical restraint because it emerges from rigorous analysis of measurable civilizational impact across multiple dimensions of assessment. These confidence con artists who have transformed science from an engine of discovery into a fortress of credentialed authority have inflicted damage upon human civilization that exceeds in magnitude and consequence the combined impact of all historical tyrannies, genocides, and political atrocities in recorded human history. The recognition of this crime and its consequences represents the essential first step towards civilizational recovery and the restoration of genuine scientific inquiry as the foundation for technological advancement and intellectual freedom. The future of human civilization depends on breaking the institutional systems that enable epistemic crime and creating new frameworks for knowledge production that reward discovery over consensus, evidence over authority, and innovation over institutional loyalty.